Hello, everybody. This is Jimmy. You're reading with Jimmy. We're reading Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, and we're analyzing pages 76, 77, next two pages. We left off with Alice discussing civility with the March Hare and saying that she could say, the March Hare was saying she should say what she means. I do, said Alice hastily replied. At least I mean what I say. That's the same thing, you know. But the Hatter comes in and says, it's not the same thing a bit. Why, you might as well just say, I see what I eat is the same as I eat what I see. I wrote these down here as we're reading them, and I want you to think, we're going to go back in a second. And the March Hare says, well, you might as well say, I like what I get is the same thing as I get what I like. And then the Dormouse, who seemed to be talking in his sleep, says, you might as well say I breathe when I sleep is the same thing as I sleep when I breathe. It is the same thing with you, said the Hatter. And here the conversation dropped, and the party sat silent for a minute, while Alice thought over all she could remember about ravens and the writing desk, which wasn't much. Remember, the Hatter had proposed the riddle to solve the riddle. Why is a raven like a writing desk? If we go back and think about this, is saying what you mean the same thing as meaning what you say? I want you to think about that, ladies and gentlemen. Is it really the same thing? I don't think it is. I really don't think it is. Saying what you mean is not the same thing as meaning what you say. Just like I see what I eat is I eat what I see. You could see a bush, for example, and you don't necessarily eat that bush. And it's the same thing as saying I get what I like and I like what I get. We don't get everything, what we get we don't always like. Is that right? And breathing when you sleep, etc. So what they're talking about here is logic, and very, very carefully weighed logic. The title of this chapter is A Mad Tea Party, and we're going to talk about madness in the next couple of pages. Or what does that mean? Concept of time and so on and so forth. But I want you to think about this, because the question you're going to have to answer at the end of this chapter are these people, are these creatures mad? Are they nuts? Are they insane? Are they deranged? Remember, we defined madness in the last chapter? So Alice is trying to solve the riddle about ravens and writing desks, and then the Hatter was the first to speak to break the silence. They sat there in silence for a while. And then the Hatter says, what day of the month is it? He had taken out his watch out of his pocket and was looking at it uneasily, shaking it every now and then and holding it to his ear. Usually when you're doing that, you're wondering if your watch is running. Maybe not nowadays, but in the old days where you had to wind it up. So he asks her what day of the month it is. Well, that's not a usual question when you're looking at a watch in those days. Maybe it is nowadays. What day of the month is it? Alice considered it a little, and then she said, the 4th. 2 days wrong, sighed the Hatter. I told you butter wouldn't suit the works, he said angrily, looking at the March Hare. 2 days wrong. Is Alice wrong, or is the Hatter's watch wrong? And what has butter got to do with all this? You're 2 days wrong. Alice says it's the 4th, right? Doesn't she say that? It's the 4th. And he says, 2 days wrong. And the March Hare meekly, it was the best butter. And the Hatter says, yes, but some crumbs must have gotten into it as well. You shouldn't have put it in with the bread knife. If you've ever spread butter on bread, with bread or crumb or whatever, sometimes crumbs get in, whatever. The March Hare took the watch and looked at it gloomily. Now, this is the Hatter's watch, right? The Hatter He pulled out his watch. This is his watch. But the March Hare looks at it and then dips it into a cup of tea and looks at it again. So he dips the watch in a cup of tea. But he couldn't think of anything better to say. He says, it was the best butter, you know. Alice had been watching over his shoulder with curiosity, and she says, it's a funny watch. It tells the day of the month, but it doesn't tell what o'clock it is. And we're all used to o'clock, what o'clock it is. In those days, they didn't have digital watches, ladies and gentlemen. They had linear watches, right, with the hands moving. But in this case, the Hatter's watch actually tells the day of the month, according to what Alice has been observing. And she says, that's a funny watch. And he says, why should it tell the o'clock? That's what he means. Does your watch tell you what year it is? Of course not, Alice says. But that's because it stays the same year for such a long time together. Which is just the case with mine, said the Hatter. What are they talking about? Well, the third-person narrator speaks up and said, Alice felt dreadfully puzzled. The Hatter's remarks seemed to her to have no sort of meaning in it, and yet it was certainly English. And she says politely, I don't quite understand you. Then the Dormouse says, the Hatter says, the Dormouse is asleep again. And so he pours a little hot tea on the Dormouse's nose. The Dormouse shook his head impatiently and said, without opening his eyes, of course, just what I was going to remark myself. Crazy, isn't it? This is crazy. He's got a watch that doesn't tell the o'clock, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? It's telling what? The day is in a month. And Alice challenges that and says, well, he says, your watch doesn't tell the year. Although nowadays, watches today tell all of that stuff, and then longitude, latitude, right? But in those days, they didn't do that. And so they're talking about time. This is the concept of time, which we're going to get into in the next 2 pages. This is Jimmy. You're reading with Jimmy. This is Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, Chapter 7, A Mad Tea Party. And you can email me, jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com, jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com. Sorry for the nasality, it's allergies. In any case, thank you for staying with us. Send me your questions, your comments, and hope your watches are telling the right time. Thanks again. Bye.